So the Conservative Party have just come back into power. They increased their share of the vote and are now ruling outside a coalition and ruling on their own account. A lot of people are very disappointed and they can't understand why the British electorate will return to power a Tory party which is going to impose even deeper austerity on them. But things aren't quite what they seem, and there are two crucial points which you have to remember. The first of which is that the Tories only got 36% of the vote, and that gave them an overall majority in Parliament because of our first past the post system. This is completely undemocratic. To give a comparison, they got 36% of the vote and got 331 seats. UKIP got 12% of the vote, they got a third as many of the votes, and yet they only got 1 seat. It is completely out of proportion and completely undemocratic. Put it into numbers, the Tories got 11 million votes. Lib Dems, UKIP and the Green Party combined got 7 million votes. That's only 4 million less, and yet between them they got 10 seats. This is a completely farcical system, the sole purpose of which is to ensure that the same two parties, Labour and the Tory party, come to power alternately. Any other parties, any other political ideas are completely frozen out. Now the argument which they put forward in favour of it is that if you have proportional representation, which would be a much fairer system, it will lead to coalition governments, and coalition governments are inherently weak. This is absolute rubbish. Germany, which is the economic and political powerhouse of Europe, has got proportional representation. Angela Merkel, who is the leader of Germany, is the most powerful leader in Europe and one of the most powerful leaders in the world. She leads a coalition government. It works for them perfectly, and it could work here just as well. People who say that proportional representation wouldn't work are simply trying to defend a system which returns the same people to power time and time again, and it needs to change. That's the first thing. The second thing is party funding. Running an advertising campaign, campaigning in a general election, is like selling a product. The more money you put into advertising, the more people are going to support you. In the last year, 2014, the Tories got £29 million in private funding. Compare that to the Labour Party, which got 18 million, UKIP, which only got 3.5 million, and the Green Party only got 600,000. When you have got that kind of funding, you can run a very, very effective and very, very professional advertising campaign. And that's what the Tories did. And it's not necessarily about being right, it's not necessarily about persuading the people that your ideas are better, it's simply about pouring money into a campaign which eventually swings public opinion, and that's what they did. The whole area of party funding is a complete corruption of our political system. And it means that basically if you can persuade wealthy people to support you, you will have a massive inherent advantage. Other countries in Europe have recognised that this is an issue, and party funding, and in particular private funding of political parties, is very, very limited. But we don't have that in this country. Most of the funding comes from private sources, and it means that parties like the Tories can run very effective and, it turns out, successful campaigns. But it's worse than that, because it actually compromises the complete legislative process. When people make private donations to political parties, they are not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. They expect legislation to be enacted in their favour, and they expect legislation which is going to go against what they want to not be enacted. And we see time and time again that all sorts of policies which the Tories have enacted have favoured the wealthiest in society and have acted against the disadvantaged in society. And whenever there have been suggestions that they should bring in policies which are going to level the playing field slightly, those policies are often quietly dropped. Private funding of political parties is an absolute corruption of our democratic process, and it needs to be stopped. And these two things, private funding and first past the post, are the two things which have returned the Tory party to power. It is not the democratic representation of the will of the people at all. Okay, so a lot of people are facing the prospect of 5 more years of Tory rule with a mixture of fear and dread. However, there's a couple of things that need to be thought of, because it may well be that the Tory government doesn't last for 5 years. The first thing is we've got a very large contingent of Scottish National Party MPs in Westminster, and they're going to be very vocal and very noisy, and they're going to be pushing for a lot of powers to be taken up to Scotland. The whole issue of Scottish independence has not gone away. David Cameron is going to have to work very hard if he wants to maintain the Union, and in particular if he wants to rebuff the SNP's requests for another referendum on Scottish independence. It's going to be very difficult for him to handle that, and very difficult for him to sustain the Union, and it's going to be very, very challenging. The second thing is, of course, the Tory party committed to having a referendum on EU independence from the EU. That is going to cause huge problems for the Conservative Party. The Tories have got a very strong Eurosceptic wing, and they have also got a very strong pro-EU wing. And I think that over the course of the next year or two, as we run up to the referendum on EU membership, the Tory party will very likely tear itself apart on this issue. It's going to become very, very heated, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Tory party pretty much implodes during the course of this referendum campaign. Combine those two things, Scottish independence and the EU referendum, with the fact that Tories have got away from the majority in Parliament. They've only got a majority of 12. That's only 6 actual seats, which they've got over the 325 halfway point. It is very likely that with a few defections and with some rebellions to do with those two debates, that the Tory party could in fact lose its majority and the government could fall. I think it's very likely that there will be another general election before the 5 years is up.